Your Honor, our next one would be Detective Sandanaga, Sandanaga. It's about 20 minutes.
All right, let's go ahead and have that witness. And is that?
And
go ahead.
We start the questioning.
All right, thank you.
State your name and business address for the record, please.
Marie Sandanaga, Marie Sandanaga, Sadanaga, and my business address is 100 West 1st Street, Los Angeles, California.
And what is your current occupation?
I am a detective with the Los Angeles Police Department, and I am the department's domestic violence coordinator.
What does it mean to be the domestic violence coordinator for the department?
So I am recognized as the person most knowledgeable in domestic violence. I oversee how our department as a whole responds to domestic violence. So I don't investigate cases right now myself. I just make sure that officers and detectives are responding to domestic violence how California State Penal Code wants us to.
And how long have you been with the LAPD?
17 years.
What, if any, policies, procedures, and protocols are in place at the LAPD for domestic violence cases separate from other types?
So once we determine there is domestic violence, we have to determine whether there is a crime. Every time we respond to a domestic violence call, per state law, we need to document whether it's a crime or just an incident, which would be when there is not a crime, but there's still paperwork done. So that is part of the officer's investigation.
Now, I had asked a little earlier about when the victim is reluctant to press charges. If the patrol officers saw property damage or marks on the face of the victim, even if the victim was not cooperating and did not want to press charges, what would the patrol officers' obligations be back in May 2016 on a domestic violence call?
If officers determined that there was domestic violence, even if a victim is reluctant, our policy is they still make that arrest if a suspect is there or take a report.
So if there are, when the patrol officers arrive at the scene, and this is May 2016, and there are 4 people that are present at the scene, how many of those individuals are the patrol officers obligated to interview? So I'm going to show you the incident call here, and it goes down and it has domestic dispute, and then it says, met with victim, looks like check location, verified husband left, victim advised verbal dispute, and refused to give any further information, issued business card. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. In May of 2016, was the language victim advised verbal dispute language that patrol officers were trained to provide when they were not going to document anything from the scene?
It can vary, but officers would commonly use the phrase verbal dispute or to document when a report was not taken.
I'm going to ask you to take a look at what has been marked as deposition exhibit number 8. It's dated November 24, 2014. And it's subject domestic violence supplemental report. And it says the domestic violence supplemental report form 15.40.02 has been revised to provide a more concise picture of the history and needs of the victim for the purpose of investigating the crime of domestic violence. Do you see that?
Yes.
What is your understanding of why the LAPD decided that they needed to create a supplemental report form that would give a more concise picture of the history and needs of the victim for the purpose of investigating the crime of domestic violence.
Right. The supplemental includes a lot of questions that are required by California state law. So we included that on it. And the original supplemental was actually created a lot earlier, I believe in 1999. This revision of it added some specific questions to help us look at kind of to do a risk assessment. I'm not sure if the supplemental is attached to this form, but on the supplemental, there's a section where I believe there's like 7 yes or no questions. That is what was added during this revision.
Detective Sandanaga, I'm going to show you what has been marked as Deposition Exhibit number 9. And do you recognize this supplemental report?
Yes.
Is this the supplemental form that was referred to in Exhibit number 8?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if we look at this and we start out on the left-hand column, and it has a number of different observations to make of the victim. And it includes shaking, unresponsive, crying, scared, angry, fearful, calm, agitated, nervous, threatening, apologetic, under the influence of alcohol, under the influence of drugs, or other observations. And it says document in narrative. All right, are these typically characteristic of victims of domestic violence?
Yes.
I'm going to turn your direction to the crime scene now. And the same question, there's a number of different items on here, including location, vandalized, ransacked, and personal property damage, furniture disarray, broken. What is your understanding of why these are included on this list?
My understanding is that these are things that are typically at a crime scene or can occur, so things that we want officers to look for and mark when they take the crime report.
And as with the questions I had on the characteristics that are on the list for the victims, are these items that are also discussed with the police officers in their training to look for in even making the determination whether a crime has taken place?
Yes, they are.
Is there a scenario under which the patrol officers decide that there's no crime, but they see property damage and injury and take photographs?
I mean, every situation is different. I believe, well, one way, if we have a situation like that occurred, then there should be a domestic violence incident report. So there is a place to document your observations and statements from people and a reason to have those photographs.
Even if ultimately the officers determined that it wasn't a crime.
And yes, that's why domestic violence incident reports are reports where there are no crime, and that is why we have them, so we can document and have a history of calls and see, in case there is another call in the future, that there is prior history of any type of domestic call, even if it was not ultimately ruled a crime.
Would that incident report include if there were interviews with witnesses and if there were any photographs or notes taken?
Yes, there is still a narrative that is written where everything, the officer's investigation and observations and any photographs are listed.
And was there an incident report in place in May of 2016 for patrol officers to use in domestic violence calls.
Yes.
Could you please describe the purpose of an incident report as of May 2016 and what was included typically in an incident report?
So the purpose of domestic violence incident reports were to record when officers responded to a call of domestic violence that did not result in a crime. They are actually required by state law for us to document every domestic violence incident that we respond to. And in that report, it's the same, I keep calling it a face sheet. That's not the official term, but the same as a crime report that we would take it on, but you fill out the information. You just do not list a suspect because we have no crime. It's the victim who was in fear that the other party may cause some type of danger to them, and that other party is then listed as a witness. And then there is a narrative that is included, the same type of narrative that would be in a crime report, where you would write down your source of activity. The officers would put their source of activity and then document their investigation. The statements that anyone made, as we ask on domestic violence calls, what type of relationship it is, how long they've been together, any prior incidents of domestic violence, all that would be included in the narrative of an incident report.
And would any photographs or other notes also be included in that incident report?
Yes, they can be, if there was anything that they saw that officers believe needed to be documented in there.
And where would an incident report, and I'm again back in May 2016, where would that be filed or stored once the patrol officers were done with their shift for the day?
The officers would turn in their reports, including any incident reports, to the watch commander, who would read over it and sign it off. And if it is approved, it would go to our records unit at that division to create a report number on it. And then it does get assigned to a detective, just so that we have it on file in case there's any future incidents.
Do officers at some point have to make a determination as to whether domestic violence has occurred?
Yes, they do.
Okay. What criteria do officers use to make that evaluation?
They use the interviews with the parties that are there, what they observe at the scene, even what they observe, like the demeanor of the victims and the suspects. Every situation is different, but it's really like taking in the whole 360 of where you are and what's occurred, so they can get all information to make that educated determination if a crime has occurred.
Can you just generally describe for me the circumstances under which a domestic incident report is used?
Oh, we take a incident report when we determine there is no crime, but that one of the parties is in fear that their life was in danger, or they could be a victim of some type of serious bodily injury. So I would think the third incidents you would have, or where we don't take the incident report, is where both parties state it was an argument, there was no physical injury, both parties say we weren't afraid that the other was going to do any type of harm to me.
Okay. And so in that case, in that third case that you just described, would there be any documentation required typically?
On that third one, when we don't have the fear, so it makes it no incident report, it's only documented on that daily field activity report.
Ms. Meadowhoff asked a line of questions earlier on in the deposition about victims of domestic violence being reluctant to come forward and speak up. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Is that a significant problem in dealing with domestic violence calls?
Yes.
Is that a problem that you have personally experienced on your own calls?
Yes.
Okay. When confronted with a person who's unwilling to make a statement, is there much that a police officer can really do if you have somebody who just refuses to make a statement and refuses to indicate that they have suffered violent abuse?
It's not too much. Usually we teach them to talk about the cycle of violence and power and control and see if we can, start a rapport with the victim and get them to discuss. But if they really don't want to tell us what happened, we can't force them.
If a potential victim has visible injuries, or that there are indications at the scene that there has been some sort of violent episode, does the fact that the potential victim declines to make a statement mean that the officers can't go forward?
No, not necessarily, because they would need to investigate more, but you do have the visible injury and, evidence of some type of struggle. So they would need to try to get that probable cause to determine that it was a crime that created that injury.
There were a number of questions asked about if observed injury, if observed property damage, back and forth, and both of us have asked you a lot of questions about this. And so I just want to make sure that it's very clear. If a police officer responding to a domestic violence call sees injury, regardless of whether the victim cooperates, what is the police officer's obligation? This is as of May 2016.
To do an investigation to determine if that injury was a result of a crime.
And that investigation would include what?
It would include interviewing anyone that is at scene, seeing if there's any type of physical evidence of altercation, or depending on the story that was given, if there's corroboration of that, seeing if there's any witnesses. Kind of depends. Each one's different, but just doing a thorough investigation.
If one of the other witnesses took the officers through the entire premises and showed broken glass, spilled wine, and a number of areas of disturbance and vandalism, what would the officers' obligations be then?
The officers would still need to determine if there was enough evidence there from these witness statements and the things that they're seeing to determine if this injury is a result of a crime.
What discretion do the police officers have when they see an injury on the victim when they reported to a domestic violence call? And this is as of May 2016.
The officers still need to do an investigation if there is a visible injury, because they have to determine if it was a crime.
So one of your roles, if I understand it, is to make a determination of that the police, the LAPD as a whole, how you're overseeing how they respond to domestic violence calls, correct?
Leading.
Yes.
And let me ask it just a little bit differently. In making the determination of whether to create an incident report, what, if any, factors can the officer consider if the victim does not want to press charges, but the officer still believes that an incident report is appropriate under the circumstances?
It would, if an officer determines that there was not a crime, yet there was enough there, and I guess what I'm trying to say, I mean, the purpose we have to think about, that we tell the officers the purpose of domestic violence incident report is for documentation of incidents, because we know with domestic violence there's usually a series of incidents that happen, and not all of those are crimes. So for us as officers, we document those, so in the future, if there is a crime, we can go back and say there have been all these other incidents. So as officers, we kind of take that into our analysis of the scene, and if we can't determine whether a crime has happened, we have to think about, do we need to document this so maybe sometime in the future people know that this happened?
All right, thank you.